Ladies and gentlemen, may I welcome you all to the first part of today's program. My name is Karl Hárceli. I am the new EU ambassador here to Georgia, and I will be moderating this session, which will be about the issue of Black Sea security. Let me say a few words to begin with on that topic, because in 2006 I was personally involved in working on developing a Black Sea strategy. I was doing that together with Ron Asmus, who might be familiar to some of you, who was working at one point very closely to Madeleine Albright and was one of the architects behind the first wave of Big Bang enlargement of the EU and NATO back in the 1990s. And in 2004, 2006, he was thinking about the future, the next steps, and was trying to think of a narrative to engage both sides of the Atlantic around a project that would anchor and lock in security in the wider region. And his narrative was the Black Sea region. And we were working together in 2006 trying to find a rationale and muster the same enthusiasm that once guided the enlargement process of the 1990s and the beginning of the new millennium. It turned out to be a rather complicated process. I think for many reasons it was more difficult to build the same momentum again around the Black Sea and the countries of the wider Black Sea region. First of all, because of the fact that we have already had enlargement, and the word enlargement fatigue was already a buzzword 12 years ago. Of course, the geographics was also another concern. This region was seen at the time as less relevant to the core of Europe and to American interest as well. And finally, there were much bigger question marks as to the real aspirations of these countries to come closer to Europe and to NATO. I think the big hooks in those days were really Georgia post-Rose Revolution and Ukraine post-Orange Revolution that gave a rationale for saying these countries have aspirations. It is worthwhile thinking about a similar approach, or at least finding ways of locking in this wider region into greater security. But the results, I would say, were less than impressive, as we know. I think on the NATO side today there is a clear Black Sea dimension. I would probably argue that in the NATO there still isn't a Black Sea strategy. However, I think in the European Union it's very difficult to find a place for the Black Sea region as such, because around the Black Sea you will find many different categories of countries. We will have two countries who are full members of both the EU and NATO. We will have one NATO member also parked presently, at least in the enlargement fold. And then, of course, countries like Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova, taking into account the wider Black Sea region, with clear aspirations, all of them being at the front of the Eastern Partnership countries, but kind of seen through the prism of the Eastern Partnership and associated partners to the European Union. And then, of course, finally, the big elephant in the room, Russia, another littoral state, and how to deal with that. And if we're talking about the strategy around the Black Sea and the thoughts that were in the minds of some of us back in 2006, that question is still an open one and still a tricky one to handle within that framework. But having said that, I think the rationale 12 years ago for why there is a need to think about this thing is still here today, and I would say arguably has been growing in importance ever since. We're talking about energy security for us. We're talking about securing trade, the link between this region, the Caspian, and further east. And also the fact that the security threats and the instability in this region has, if anything, grown and become much more of a focal point also in Europe, not least after 2014 in Ukraine and the new challenges to our European security order. So, if anything, I think having a new look at this region from a security perspective is more relevant than ever. And therefore, I'm very happy to have 4 panelists, 4 esteemed members of parliaments of Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, and the European Parliament here today. I will ask them to introduce the topic, after which we will open up, I would say, not only for questions, you are free to pose questions, of course, but also add your voice in terms of comments and ideas to this discussion. So without further ado, let me start by welcoming Tamar Khulodava, who is the chairperson of the Committee of European Integration in the Parliament of Georgia. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador. Good morning. It is my first opportunity to address the members of the newly established Parliamentary Assembly of 3 countries. And I'm very happy that this idea that was born some time ago has materialized, and we are having the opportunity to start trilateral dialogue on important issues that are on the agenda of the 3 countries. And of course, among them, important is how do we handle existing challenges? And when you talk about existing challenges, of course, you talk about security. And Black Sea obviously is an area that unites us and which is logical to, it's logical to think of regional challenges and security perspective looking at the Black Sea region. Although, of course, some people argue, that it's not really a region. Either even geographically, whether it is a region or not, or culturally or historically, the countries are very diverse. Ambassador has already spoken that political also and affiliation differences with EU, with NATO. Of course, there are 3 countries, Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, that are on their independent path, joining forces right now in ensuring that their ambition of joining EU materializes. We have NATO member states and EU member states as part of the general Black Sea area, the coastline, but we also have this elephant in the room that was also referred to, which is difficult to ignore in this situation, obviously. And that, I think, the fact that Black Sea also geographically includes Russia has prevented EU from being able to really delivering a Black Sea strategy up until now. Because, as it was said earlier, there were a number of attempts after the enlargement or after Romania and Bulgaria joined NATO. It became obvious that NATO would think about the region, because this became also the border of NATO. Of course, Turkey was there, and then there was enlargement in 2007 of EU, which brought EU borders to the Black Sea. But the meaningful strategy was still missing and is still missing because of the fact that nobody really knows how to deal with this fact that Russia is a very important player on the scene. Of course, for Russia, this is an area of influence which it doesn't want to give up. And the strategy is to destabilize the region further and to keep the problems or keep status quo, which gives advantage to Russia and its policy right now. We have, Georgia is affected with 2 conflicts. We've had the war in 2008, which was unfortunately not enough to make the world understand what a serious challenge it was, or what a serious problem and the risk it was to the civilized world. Then we had the Crimea annexation, which became a greater wake-up call, a more louder one, and something that, made people realize that it shouldn't be taken, not seriously. And of course, Moldova is affected also by this protracted conflict, which is only in the interests of Russia, because with keeping this conflicts ongoing, the political cost of engaging further with our region and making next step, political step from EU side, from NATO side, rises for the EU and NATO side. So, of course, this is in the interests of Russia. But what is in our interests? In our interest, it is to cooperate, to work together. And Black Sea, I would say, Black Sea area is a unique area, which is, of course, a challenging one, but it also is the one of plenty of new opportunities. But these opportunities need to be explored and need to be employed. And I think this is a good start. We have to start thinking more strategically on how we can really work as a region and try to work together to help each other, not only in political objectives, in pursuing our political objectives, but also in practical terms, act as a region and try to pursue our objectives in many different fields and areas. Of course, it was mentioned the importance of the region in terms of transport, in terms of trade, in terms of access to energy resources. Of course, this is a very important factor, and these are very important factors that make our region politically, strategically important for EU. It was already in 2016 EU global strategy that it was mentioned that security of the Black Sea area is directly linked or has relevance and importance to the European security and EU security. So that is recognized as such on the statement level, but follow-up is needed. What shall we do? NATO has started, as it was also referred in the introductory remarks of the ambassador, to have more strategic, or not strategic, it was not really strategic as you mentioned, but NATO has declared at Warsaw Summit in 2016 increased presence in the Black Sea was necessary, and that was a step, that was a new initiative, and that was very much welcome from Georgian side also. Georgia has very dynamic relations with NATO, and we are trying to be as engaged as possible in all the NATO-related activities. And obviously also this initiative was something that was also quite promoted and lobbied from by Georgian side, and that was met with a lot of enthusiasm. But is it enough? Is it a strategy? Is it part of a strategy, or is it an isolated action? Is it just the activity or just an action to make NATO more visible in this region? This is not enough. What we need is more strategic engagement, more involvement from the European Union and also NATO, and a better protection and better ability to pursue our common objective. In order to materialize these great plans of energy, transit, and trade routes, which are very important and could be economically very advantageous, not only for our countries but also for EU, we need stability. But stability is not something which can be provided in isolation by any one country. We need to work together, to join forces and efforts, but our efforts, our three countries, probably will not be enough in this to face this very, very complex challenge. But we need to work together with EU, and we need to work together with our partners to ensure that we have the stability that we need and the peace that we need to be able to bring to our countries what is really our ambition. Because EU membership is not an end goal in itself. It's not an end in itself. It is the means to achieve what we want to have in Georgia, in Moldova, in Ukraine. We want to have peaceful, stable, life which ensures development and prosperity of our citizens. That is how we look at the space which is now called European Union, and that is why it has such a great attraction for countries such as Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova. So let's work together to achieve what we want to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me immediately hand the floor over to Yevgen Karpov, Chairperson of the Committee on National Security, Defense and Public Order, the Parliament of Moldova. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Carl. Good morning, dear colleagues. Let me first to thank the organizers for the opportunity to have this very important discussion on a topic of common interest, such as perspectives of the Black Sea security. The Black Sea security region is a crossroad, an intersection of ways between Europe and Middle East, from the Eastern Balkans to the South Caucasus. Like many such points of intersection, it is often a friction point. This is very much the case in the current geopolitical environment of growing confrontation between Russia and the West. The Black Sea region still plays an important strategic role, as the geopolitical realities highlight that establishing control over principal trade routes crossing the Black Sea has always been the interest of regional or even global powers. In this logic, access to the Black Sea is vital for all littoral or neighboring states and greatly enhances the possibility of projecting the power into further regions. The threats and vulnerabilities to the security of the Black Sea are diverse and multiple. Main security threats of the region are represented by the geographical factors, such as proximity to frozen conflicts, porous borders, ethnic or nationalistic tensions, transnational criminal organizations, and terrorist or extremist groups. All of this representing serious threats to the riparian states as well as to the fundamental rights of the citizens. Following Russia's annexation of Crimea, the Black Sea region has been subject to a constant and accelerated militarization. The increase in the quantity and complexity of the military capabilities concentrated in the region represents a matter of real concern for the regional and global actors. The annexation of Crimea and the emergence of two separatist republics in eastern Ukraine have radically transformed the strategic landscape in the wider Black Sea region, as Russia and the West have entered a period of military political confrontation. Russia and NATO cannot rely on each other's good intentions. Russia perceives its military build-up in Crimea as defensive, but NATO and EU partners consider it as offensive and answers with symmetrical measures. The Russian Federation is seeking the consolidation of its power in its near abroad, and states like Ukraine, Georgia, and the Republic of Moldova have become the object of continuous containment. EU's and NATO's approach for the region through the enlargement policy, the Partnership for Peace program, or even the membership action plans have intensified Russia's so-called perception of insecurity. It has also contributed to the consolidation of the narratives that picture the Russian Federation as a victim of the Western aggression, which has no other alternative than the increase of its military capabilities. In addition, countries in the Black Sea region have been subject to coordinated non-military actions, intensive disinformation campaigns, interference in the electoral processes, economic pressures, cyber operations, cultural and ethnic leverages meant to shape their orientation in the East-West confrontation. The Black Sea is also a strategic route for the export of a substantial part of Russia's energy. Oil and oil products are shipped on huge tanker vessels that circulate between Novorossiysk in the Black Sea coast and the Mediterranean Sea, crossing the Turkish Straits. The existing Trans-Black Sea gas pipeline, called the Blue Stream, connects Russia and Turkey directly through the Black Sea. Following the tactical rapprochement between Moscow and Ankara in summer 2017, the construction of the Turk Stream gas pipeline has begun, a new export gas pipeline from Russia to the European part of Turkey. On the other hand, the area's status as a point of intersection and an important transit corridor emphasize the vulnerabilities and the risks generated by the migratory flows fleeing the regions affected by conflicts. The Black Sea route is not a favored option for refugees and migrants, and the illegal border crossings are still at low level comparing to other migratory routes, but on a growing trend. Another crucial source of risk to the security environment in the Black Sea region is the existence of long frozen conflicts. Protracted conflicts affecting Georgia, Moldova, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the ongoing military conflict in eastern Ukraine remain a challenge to democratic development and security of the region. These conflicts continue to prevent development and create hardships in our countries. Russia maintains and intensifies military bases in Armenia, the occupied territories and separatist regions of Georgia and Moldova, respectively, as part of its strategy of playing a predominant regional role in Eastern Europe, as well as of using military presence as a leverage to exert pressure on these countries in contradiction with its international commitments to uphold the international legal order. In contrast, the EU, in line with the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, peaceful settlement of disputes, and inviolability of borders, has supported the territorial integrity of affected countries and refused to recognize breakaway regions as independent states. It has engaged in political dialogue and mediation on all the conflicts with the aim of reaching peaceful solutions. It supports the full and genuine implementation of the Minsk agreements in eastern Ukraine, of the 1999 Istanbul OSCE decision as regards the withdrawal of Russian troops from the territory of the Republic of Moldova, the OSCE Minsk group and its co-chairs in their efforts to solve the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and avoid any new eruption of violence and military fighting. The EU co-chairs the Geneva International discussions on the consequences of the Russia-Georgia conflict and constantly calls on full implementation by Russia of the 2008 ceasefire agreement and is an active observer in the 5+2 format for the settlement process of the Transnistrian conflict. The Republic of Moldova stays engaged and will continue to advocate consistently for the unconditional withdrawal of Russian troops and ammunition from the Moldovan territory, as well as for the transformation of the current peacekeeping operation on the Dniester River into a multinational civilian mission with an international mandate. The issue concerning the illegal presence of foreign troops has been addressed recurrently since 1992. Despite the fact the Russian Federation has repeatedly committed itself to withdrawing its troops from the region and to respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Republic of Moldova, it has constantly defied the common sense. The actual illegal military presence counts about 1,700 soldiers and about 20,000 tons of ammunition stored in Kobasna, a small village close to the Ukrainian border. Despite the fact that all parties support mediation efforts and peaceful settlement of the conflicts in Black Sea region, so far diplomatic and mediation efforts have turned out to be insufficient to set positive prospects for conflicts. The EU and NATO should increase their efforts in order to reach a peaceful resolution of all ongoing conflicts in its neighborhood that threaten European security as a whole, and commit to sustaining the unity of action among EU and NATO member states in maintaining collective pressure on Russia. All common security challenges usually are connected, and we must face them together. To join our forces in countering political populism, resurrection of economic protectionism, and last but not the least, return of brutal geopolitics into interstate relations. Our objectives are to keep our countries stable by increasing resilience, reducing internal divisions, and resolving the protracted conflicts. In conclusion, the real challenge is how to enhance cooperation between our countries with the support of our Western partners in order to improve the security realities and tackle common threats. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Evgen. Next speaker is Anna Pukko, chairperson of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, Verkhovna Rada, Ukraine.
Good morning, everybody. It's a big privilege today to discuss the security in Black Sea region, especially after recent escalation of the security situation in Azov Sea in Ukraine. So this is the new theater for Russian Federation to use Azov Sea. It's well connected also to Donbas region, and after Russia managed to build the Kerch bridge, which also blockades the trade within two port cities, Berdyansk and Mariupol in Ukraine. So, and it's understandable why Russia extended its militarization of Black Sea and through Azov Sea also, blocking the access of Ukrainian trade ships to two ports, Mariupol and Berdyansk city. And this is another way of occupation of through economic blockade in Ukraine, and actually hybrid tactics that we have to keep in mind. And also it's another instrument before presidential and parliamentary election in Ukraine to use the social unhappiness or tensions as another argument of spreading Russian propaganda that situation economically in Ukraine is worsening, especially in those very vulnerable cities in Ukraine. And also let me focus on what Ukraine is doing for restoring our territorial integrity and sovereignty, because all the attempts of illegal annexation of Crimea, it's created a lot of problem for the whole Black Sea region, not just for Ukraine. And it's important that UN General Assembly has recognized Russia as an occupying power. It was in the UN resolution in 2016, and it's really important that all responsibility for occupation of Crimea is on Russian hand. And you know that Ukraine initiated arbitration proceedings against the Russian Federation in September 2016. Ukraine is vindicating its right in the face of Russian flagrant violation of international law in appropriate international forums, including the UNCLOS case, as well as Ukraine's case against the Russian Federation before the International Court of Justice. So it's really important that we do the comprehensive legal attempt to punish Russia along the entire legal front line. The most important thing is that Russia will not only be punished for the violation of the rights, but also pay for that. It's really important for us. But I also today would like to discuss the issue of militarization of Crimea. Everybody who visited Crimea before, it was well-known resort area for recreation, and now we can just say that currently the nature of weapons and of currently 32,000 strong and self-sufficient joint forces grouping composed of the ground, air and naval components, as well as existing according to our information plans to increase its personnel to 40,000. So after attempted annexation of Crimea, Russia doubled its military presence, and also Russia can fully utilize geostrategic potential of the peninsula to wield influence in the Black Sea region and to exert pressure against NATO. For example, Iskander's guided missiles could cover the entire southern part of Ukraine, including important industrial cities such as Odessa, Kryvyi Rih, and Dnipro, a large part of Moldova and entire Romanian coastline, and a significant part of the Turkish Black Sea coast. The surface-to-surface missile system are being now complemented by long-range anti-aircraft and anti-ship missiles providing full capability to strike ground target, interdict maritime traffic and impose no-fly zones. After the attempted annexing Crimean Peninsula, Russia has been rebuilding its Black Sea fleet to ensure its regional dominance and to lay the foundation for further external power projections, strengthening other littoral, including NATO member states. And first, after militarization of Crimea, we have to talk about nuclearization of Crimea, and this is also against the non-proliferation treaty, and Russia is using different infrastructure for nuclear weapons and using also Crimea, not just militarization and nuclearization, not just against Ukraine, but also in other countries and NATO members. So I think it's important to strengthen Ukraine, Romania, and other countries' capability to protect ourselves. And recent example, when U.S. handed over 2 island-class patrol boats to naval forces of Ukraine, and they will be in Ukraine helping us to protect. And also, we also moved to Azov Sea several military ships in case of escalation of the conflict, also to show our readiness. And I think it's important. Just recently, the U.S. State Department representatives from energy sector, he visited Genichisk, Strelkovo, it's near the coastline of Azov Sea. And I think that NATO members and also EU members, they, besides visiting eastern Ukraine, where is the hot stage of war and no ceasefire, it's important also to cover and to demonstrate the presence in Azov Sea, Black Sea, like we have the Sea Breeze trainings, operations in Odessa, and also to cover Azov Sea situation as well. And I think it's important to keep the non-recognition policy and even to strengthen, because at the UN level, Russia tries to advocate mentioning Crimea as a disputed areas, not like belonging to Ukraine. And thanks to United States for recent adoption of Crimean or approval of Crimean declaration as a part of non-recognition policy. And I think it's important both for European Union, United States, G7 countries, also to fight with Russian disinformation, Russian propaganda, and also all elections. Russia used Crimea in their parliamentary election in 2000, State Duma election 2016. Also, Russia used citizens of Crimea during the presidential election this year. And we called to OSCE ODIHR program not to recognize the election in the part of occupied Crimea conducted. And it's important also to create, after Crimean declaration of the United States, it's important to create the platform, a special platform of deoccupation of Crimea, because as for the peaceful settlement of Russian aggression in eastern Ukraine, in Donbass, we have Normandy format, we have trilateral contact groups in Minsk. But as for Crimea, we have sanctions, but we don't have a special platform, where besides security issues, we have to cover very important issues of human rights violations in Crimea Peninsula, and important issue for us to release political prisoners that are in the temporarily occupied Crimea. Unfortunately, from the resolution of the European Parliament last October, thanks for this resolution, that you mentioned all political prisoners by names, which are in prison or in detained, now detained, the number of political prisoners has doubled. So the situation with human rights violation is worsening. So this is really important to increase pressure and to focus on humanitarian aspects and the issue of human rights. And I think it's, you mentioned Turkey, you mentioned Turkish Stream as energy projects. For Ukraine, it's important to talk about Nord Stream 2, because this is the existential threat for Ukraine's future, Ukraine economic development, and I think also for energy security and stability for the whole Europe. It's also very security risk project. And of course, Ukraine is using all international courts, suing Russia. Besides, as mentioned, UNCLOS case, we are also suing Russian International Court of Justice using two conventions. One is countering terrorism, second, it's discrimination of human rights, like Crimean Tatars. And it's really important to support these cases and international court system. And what I could also say, so globally, Russia, after its attempted annexation of Crimea, undermined the security of Black Sea region and wider. And I think it's important for all of us to use Interparliamentary Assembly, Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and the presence of representatives of EU here, also to think about the new mechanism, how to proactively work in countering Russian propaganda in all countries of Black Sea region. And today in the morning we had very good discussion on disinformation and stop fake information. Thanks for NDI and our partners from the European Parliament. I think it's really important to think how to implement using the members of parliament from security committees, national security committees, foreign affairs committees, and also to establish a special inter-parliamentary instruments, Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and European Parliament, and the best think tanks, how to respond rapidly, and not just defensive approach, and also preventive approach, knowing the plans of Russia. And in the eve of election in Moldova and in Ukraine, and also in European Parliament elections, so and in Georgia, yeah. So it's really important. So I hope that by uniting efforts, and it's pity that the Interparliamentary Assembly we established just now, after if we manage to establish such instrument at the beginning of our restoring independence, and Soviet Union was collapsed, it's, I'm sure, could help us more, and even probably to prevent some of the cases of like Russian aggression. And the last point you mentioned, the emergence of two separate republics. So we do not recognize so-called DNR and LNR. So there are no so-called republics. This is Russian military troops occupying Ukrainian territory of Donbass, and Ukraine adopted a law. According to the law, it's no DNR, LNR. Even if they are preparing now election there, but we understand everybody that this is totally controlled, sponsor, finance from Kremlin, and this is just the Russian puppets at Ukrainian territory, and Russian military generals are ruling of all these people. And we are also calling to our partners in the European Union not to recognize, not to allow to establish the diplomatic divisions like in France. We've seen so-called DNR office, diplomatic office. So actually just responding to this, that it's really important. And you know that this week Ukrainian parliament prolongated the special status law on Donbass, proving that Ukraine is a reliable partner, and we hope that sanctions policy against Russian Federation, especially in EU, we will see unity, even if some countries in the European Union would like to be back to the business as usual with Russia. But I think it's important when Ukraine proves our dedication to peaceful settlement of conflict, so the support from EU and United States is really united. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Final speaker on our panel is Michael Gahler, member of the European Parliament. Please.
Thank you very much. First of all, thanks for inviting the European Parliament representatives to this inaugural session of your Interparliamentary Assembly. We welcome this establishment and wish you good luck in your cooperation. Second, we have what I've heard before. I need not repeat and fully subscribe to what has been said in analyzing the situation here in the region. When it comes to our discussions in the European Parliament and in the European Union on this region, well, indeed, it has been several times mentioned, the so-called elephant in the room, that in this climate region is often dressed up as a bear. This elephant is omnipresent and needs to receive joint action, joint answers. We have separate sets of sanctions, both towards the occupation and annexation of Crimea and towards the aggression in the east of Ukraine, so that we will conduct this discussion further, even when we might have some governments in the European Union that might have certain other reflexes, but I'm confident that the arguments are convincing to maintain what has to be maintained. When it is about the Black Sea region coming from the center of Europe, I think it is politically, first of all, important to get the attention of the mainstream that, hey, behind the Black Sea there is also still a part of Europe, to put it this way, looking on Georgia, because some might think that the western shore, when with Romania and Bulgaria, that's it. And I think we have a common task to make it clear there is something that follows still, and that has also aspirations that we support. So that is politically one important thing, and we've had, in the first half of this year, we had the Bulgarian presidency, and accordingly we have our traditional joint parliamentary conference for common foreign and security and defense policy, which was held in Sofia in February, which shed another light on the security situation in this area. We have had in the European Parliament reports before, after the Russian aggression, and of course we have to assess a difficult situation. Although Bulgaria and Romania have been in NATO and in the EU for quite a while, their military capabilities, when it is about the naval force, for instance, of Bulgaria and Romania, has not increased since they became members, or even since the Russian aggression. So that's a fact of life. Yes, if we look geographically from a NATO perspective, from the southwestern border of Ukraine to the southwestern border of Georgia, southward on the southern side, that is all NATO territory, indeed. But still, with the Russian policy and aggression, we see their stepping up of presence and also of their very recent offensive ways to demonstrate their power in the Azov Sea. I think it is interesting to follow the discussions that are ongoing in Ukraine with regard to there's a 2003 treaty between Russia and Ukraine, which at the time said, well, let's consider the Azov Sea as an internal water, so where the international rules, 3-mile zones or how many miles, and then national and territorial waters, which doesn't apply. That was in 2003, that was another situation. Insofar, it is interesting to discuss now whether it would make sense to finalize this treaty and apply international rules for the access, or whether it is politically more appropriate to leave it as it is and insist that the free access for ships is being guaranteed. I mean, what we see in the Azov Sea is that it's not so much Ukrainian ships, that's only 2%, as I'm told, of those who go to Bryansk and Mariupol, but it's, since April, we've had around 120 ships under European flag that have been not denied access, but that have been hindered for up to 3 days to continue their trip towards or from these 2 Ukrainian ports, which has of course had its impact on the profitability of this such trips. If you are held for 3 days, it rises the costs. So what I would suggest very concretely also to us in the European Union, that we make that an issue towards Russia, that our ships, it's our own right where we can argue that they are hindered, and to tell Russians to avoid that. I mean, they have the right to check. They've used 1 or 2 hours in earlier times, and now it takes them up to 3 days. These are current developments. I do not want to suggest that we should react tit for tat in our ports to let the Russian ships wait, till they are handled. But I think they should be made aware that certain behavior is not appropriate in this situation. Now, what we can do, I mean, we are not yet, not at this stage, discussing membership perspectives both for EU and NATO, but we recognize, and especially as a Parliament, recognize and support your aspirations. So let us do between nothing and full membership. There is a lot that can be done, so to say, prior to full membership. That is on the one side, and that is why you are all together here as well. What you are doing with the DCFTA implementations, so these comprehensive, very ambitious treaties, there is a lot where implementing that also contributes to security also in this region. That is the one thing. Let us do what is in the NATO framework done in cooperation with your countries as far as you want it and as far as we can go. But also let us support all your joint activities in capacity building, when it's about the defense capabilities, when it is about cooperation of our defense industry and research that you are doing. When I look to Ukraine and your very sophisticated industry that you've got, I would, it's a two-way thing. I mean, on the one hand, you supply a good legal framework for cooperation so that our companies dare to come. On the other side, it's also, as a consequence then, I think your companies should be in a position then to find partners in the EU and not be desperately saying, well, I would like to cooperate, but the only ones who want to cooperate with me are the Chinese. So that should also not be our aim in this regard. So I think also in this area there is a lot of room for improvement of cooperation. And by getting our companies engaged in your region here, by getting our companies having their firm investment and, so to say, be rooted on the ground, that increases our interest and through our industry as well, to keep you on a safe side or to get you on a safe side. So I would request also for your own sake to do the utmost to see how you can root our companies, our interest in your soil. We will not take it away. It will all stay in your countries, whatever area. But that is a point, I think, where the awareness in our countries, both from the general public, from our industry, into the relevance, our awareness into the relevance of your countries will increase. And insofar, I hope that also out of the discussions that you might have amongst yourselves, and to check what is best practice to attract investment and to root our interest in your countries, that this is a very useful way in the medium term to get us in a position, as I always like to say, you are the brides. You need to be attractive for us, that at some point we cannot resist you anymore when it's about getting you fully on board. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So that ends our preliminary remarks, or the first remarks from the panelists, and we are now about to open the floor for questions and comments from the floor. I sense a number of common themes from our speakers here. Obviously, the scars and implications of the conflicts is a theme in all the interventions we have heard. Also, the issue about tackling that by building resilience through many different means. Of course, in this region, the issue of military threat is still prevalent in a different way than in many other parts of Europe, and it's something which will have to be taken into account, but also the wider spectrum of the security challenges, such as disinformation, hybrid, cyber, etc., has been highlighted here. I sense a common theme also of the resolve of using this platform as a way of comparing notes and increased cooperation between yourselves and with the European Union and other partners linked up to that and willing to help you on many of these challenges. So with that, may I open the floor for comments, questions. I start with Ana Gomez in the front row.
Yes, I would like to ask you, Tamar and Anna in particular, but any of you, what are your thoughts, considering your experience in the front line of indeed not just aggression, but familiar. Now there's a realization, but who's not so experienced about the impact of this information that you've been enduring, and how to counter that in your societies. Thank you.
Is there any other question we can take at the same time, or comment to the panelists? You think about it, and you can start answering the first one. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the interventions also, because there are some comments and follow-ups to the intervention of colleagues that I also wanted to have an opportunity to come back to. But first of all, responding to the question from Ana Gomez, we cannot be very, I think we are all experienced by now, and we all know by now what the threat is and what the hybrid warfare is and what disinformation can do. And it's not only Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, and us really, we are in the front line, but besides us, I think also more distant EU member states and further away countries have felt the strength of it and the importance to be aware of it and do something about it. Now, what can we do about it? The only thing, I don't think we can be, or at least I cannot be very creative in responding to this. We need a greater engagement, political, our countries, because we are still in a more vulnerable situation, as we are in the front line and we are directly affected from everything. We need more presence and more political support. We should not create the sense that these countries are abandoned by the EU, because that is going to put an end to our great hopes and that is going to only be something which is liked by the elephant in the room. So I think the first thing is to create the sense that this region and these countries are important for the EU. We need to get more Europeans understand that the Europe doesn't end with Black Sea, as Mr. Carlo was talking. And I understand that this is not so easy, and there are many people who think that that's the end of not the world, but of the EU. And it is not, because, and for Georgia it is even more relevant than for Ukraine and Moldova, because Ukraine and Moldova share land borders with the EU. With Georgia, our only border with the EU is Black Sea, and of course, I mean, in that sense, Black Sea is even more important to us, because that is our bridge to the EU. But we need to make it clear to the European community that there is a European country on the eastern border of the Black Sea, and that is a task that we can only do if we cooperate, and if you help us as EU member states and as European Parliament politicians, because we cannot do it alone. We should share, we should do our part of it, but we should probably, we will be much more effective if we are supported by you. So that is engagement. And then, of course, how do you fight disinformation? We fight disinformation with information. When people need to be equipped with right information so that they are not vulnerable to these very targeted disinformation and campaigns that we are quite often exposed to. And this needs to be done in a very, I think, sometimes even subtle way, because sometimes this, in Georgia, for example, anti-Western sentiments are provoked or are promoted with this idea that EU is equals losing Georgia's national identity. Georgia is a very traditional country. It comes with a lot of history, culture, and the preservance of this cultural identity is for us very important. And of course, this is something that is employed very well by Russia, who, after all these years, of course, has a very good understanding of what can play a very important role and what can be a good instrument in this disinformation campaign. So we have to portray what EU really is, what Europe really is. We do that, but we will need also there more engagement from the European side. EU that we talk about is the unity of many countries that all come with their own strength, with their own cultural identity, with their own very strong national identity. And that is why it is the space which attracts us so much, because it doesn't require you to denounce your culture, but it embraces you as you are and for what you are. And that is what needs to be communicated better also to the society, because this very primitive, at one sense, at one glance, sentiments are very often abused and used to disadvantage this discourse. May I comment on some of the other comments, or should I do it later? Yeah. We are talking, Mr. Karl was talking about the importance of economic interest, and I just wanted to come back to that and stress it once again. Of course, political interests are generated if there are economic ties and interests, and that's why we have made it our priority to do regional cooperation, to build infrastructure, and to improve investment climate, and to make this place a place attractive for European business. Now, of course, this is not a one-way effort, and this is not something which can deliver results only from one side. It is important, again, and it ties to the issue of getting European society understand that there is something on the other side, that we need to bring more German, Portuguese, and other EU interests to Georgia, so that, and to the other countries, so that this region doesn't lose its relevance. When you are economically tied, you are also politically more engaged. I mean, that is so. You have to see economic advantage in order to be able to put this on the agenda and to constantly, and steadily take the issue forward. And I think that is something which we realize very well. Georgia has this, the only potential we have because we do not share the land border with EU, and of course this geography factor is also something that pushes us back a little bit and puts us in a disadvantageous situation also compared to Ukraine and Moldova, because geography is important, we all understand. But we have to employ the means that we have, and we have to use the avenues that are there for Georgia to argue that this part of territory, this place is important for EU's economic, strategic interests. And as I also alluded and said in the first part, it is recognized by the EU that the conflicts and the tensions in this region create a threat to European security, European unity. And if this is understood as a statement, there should also be more action from the EU side in trying to translate the statement into concrete actions and strategy for engagement with this region. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, I open the floor for further questions. Oh, sorry. Anya. Okay.
Okay, just to add some words and present the view on the question you addressed. Well, it is obvious that disinformation is a part of the instruments Russia is using as part of the hybrid war that is part of Russian aggressive policy towards neighboring countries. Moldova is a place of different experiments, and we also, as representative of Ukraine, of Georgia, said we have our experience in how fighting disinformation. For example, in Moldova, last year we adopted some modifications to the legislation on audiovisual field, and we simply prohibited all Russian programs that present news and talk shows, because news from Russian Federation are based on fake news. The talk shows are clearly oriented politically in order to change the minds of the population in neighboring countries, including Moldova. Why? In order to create an increased number of supporters in different states of Russian policy. The main principle probably of Russian Federation now is divide and rule. Divide by using economic aspects, using energy, using different ethnic or religious possibilities. Another example from Moldova, energy sector. Moldova is dependent on Russian gas 100%. On electricity, we have our internal capabilities to produce electricity less than 50%, and we have to buy electricity from abroad. To reduce dependence of Russian gas, we are in a serious discussion with the European Union. We worked on an alternative plan, how to reconnect Moldova to the gas grid from Europe. And now we have concrete plans and we are in process to build a pipeline connecting Moldova to Romania, and through Romania to the possibility of importing natural gas from a European part. And we hope in a year Moldova will not be dependent on Russian gas with strong European support. This is a positive example how to work. On electricity, there is another dilemma and a contradiction, logic contradiction, because we have a big electricity plant in Transnistria, in Transnistrian region, separatist region. On one hand, we are not recognizing so-called authorities from this part of Moldova, separatist authorities. On the other hand, we buy about 50% of electricity from this plant, paying huge amount of money for this region, paying to their so-called local budget, and indirectly supporting the existence of this regime. Now we work again together with our European partners on projects how to reconnect Moldovan electricity system to, again, Romania. We are lucky and happy to have direct border through Romanian border to European Union and to NATO, and we have to benefit at maximum from the opportunities that this geographical factor offer to us. Well, as conclusion concerning Russian policy, we understand if EU response is weaker, then Russian policy is more aggressive. It means that we have to stay having clear common principles concerning Russian actions and to react accordingly together. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for this important question. I think the best response to Russian disinformation, fake news, propaganda is a successful Ukraine. So successful Ukraine with the rule of law, with good economic growth, not 2.3% of growth per year, which we've seen in 2016, 2017 in Ukraine, but more like 5, 7. And this brings the issue of investment, which we would like to see more, also to see the growth of GDP in Ukraine. So I think also a successful Ukraine is a nightmare for Mr. Putin and Kremlin regime. And of course for Russian citizens. This is a good example that after all struggle, revolutions, Ukraine is becoming a country where Russians would like to live. Because I'm sure that successful Ukraine, it's also important for the whole region, because it's the beginning of transformation in Russia. We Ukrainians, we don't want to fight with Russians forever. So one day we want to see also transformed, democratic, even if it's now considered as a dream, but still, Soviet Union collapsed in 2 weeks. But before 70 years of making Ukraine, Georgia, and other countries as hostages of Soviet Union. So, but our independence, yes, impossible is possible. So, and I truly believe one day Russian Kremlin, Putin's regime will end. And this is why it's important the success of Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, and also Belarus. Today we are not mentioning, but also we understand that the recent example and what Putin is trying to make, also to take Belarus under the sphere of influence, totally dependent from Russian gas, energy, trade, and others. So we have to be smarter and to understand what are the tactics and the real ambition of Russia. And also, I think that energy, because with Moldova, we have joined ENSOE agreement where on electricity independence, we have to work hard to join to the electricity grid of EU and to move away from Russian influence. So this is, I think, where the European Union could help us. Ukraine, for more than 1,000 days, is not buying any more directly gas from Russia. So Russia could not easily blackmail Ukraine. However, this March it happened but the Ukrainians and the EU, we managed to answer on Russian blackmail, and we won the case in Stockholm arbitrage, Ukrainian company Naftogaz against Gazprom, and now Gazprom is obliged to pay Ukraine around 4 billions. So this is really important. And but still, Nord Stream 2, it's another problem. And answering on, thanks Michael for mentioning this, how to make relevance for you and how to attract more investment. And I think here what Lithuanian colleagues started to promote is a new European investment plan. It's not about macro-financial assistance like loans from IMF. It's about how to create a good investment climate in Ukraine to bring more European companies to Ukraine to build big infrastructure projects like highways from Odessa through Ukraine to Baltic states and others. So I think it's, I agree, more economic ties, more political support and more security advantages. So there it's all interconnected. And this is why we are starting also to push Ukrainian government to prepare a package of investment projects in Ukraine. Because now we've seen a big interest from China to invest in Ukraine. And I think for Ukraine it's important to see the competition between China and European companies or American companies who could provide us more security guarantees. So for Ukraine, our investment policy is connected to our geopolitical threats and Russian aggression. So it's also important to keep in mind. And of course, continue reforms in Ukraine, and also Moldova mentioned example of modification of law prohibited Russian programs. From 2014, when Russia started its aggression, we banned Russian TV channels in Ukraine. Of course, they could move through internet and satellite. They could still broadcast, but on cable, on TVs, like it's banned. We prohibited Russian, it's true, sorry, Russian movies. We, as a decision of National Council of Security and Defense, what we discussed in the morning during the breakfast, we banned Russian social networks, Vkontakte, Odnoklassniki, Russian, like a Russian version of Facebook. It's also important. So I think it's, and we adopted a law on decommunization. When we renamed street, we demolished Russian, Soviet Union times like Stalin monuments and others. It's a part of identity issue for Ukraine. It's a part of bringing more European values, replacing Russian or Soviet different like monuments, name of streets and others. So I think this is how we are fighting with Ruski Mir, Russian world, yes, in Ukraine, and making our TV, culture, cinema production independent from Russian influence. Because before, Russia invested a lot of money in joint film production, in which movie you could show Putin portraits and advertisement of Russian regime, so which is unacceptable. So I'm happy that Moldova is joining to Ukrainian example, because Russia is using TV for promoting pro-Russian parties also. And this is the new challenge that we have to prepare the answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
Be provocative, colleagues. This is not a theater session. It's not you who are the onlookers in the theater, and we are performing a drama or something else here on the stage. That is something interactive. And should I provoke you? I mean, my question is, of course, what, with regard to the topics that we are discussing here, is there any approach from your own citizens, from your constituents at home, what are they actually expecting from you? Or are they not expecting anything from you? Are they only looking to their government? Are they expecting something from us and you transport it through you to us? Or I mean, normally I would say that the people would expect from you to deliver on their very concrete living situations, and then for us the question comes, how can we be supportive from the European side for that? Is there anything that you are asked or demanded from your local people that is of relevance for us in the European Union or for your cooperation here? So I cannot imagine that they are also only onlooking, but they are quite demanding, I think, your people.
So there's a challenge now from the players of the stage.
Should we ring a wake-up call or no? Morning exercise. They don't want to be provoked.
Is anyone willing to take up the challenge of the stage?
Provocation is I threaten to go to your constituencies and say that your member didn't show up, didn't ask any question. No, sorry.
I saw one hand being risen, a man who does not have a constituency, but, well, he has a European one. Peter Wagner over there, please.
Thank you very much. But the Commission has the right of initiative, at least within the EU, so I may use this also here. Let's try with a provocative question. And all the three speakers of the parliaments referred to national values, traditions, etc., in a general sense. Now, indirectly, you can, of course, also link them to the main theme of the panel, and that is security. Where are these values in societies potentially clashing with the wider security considerations which you see by moving towards the West? Because not always the values are pushing for a move towards what the Western standard values at these moments seem to be.
I will speak of Georgia, and the colleagues will give their perspective. In Georgia, it is quite clear, I think. Georgia is placed in a very difficult neighborhood and environment, but what has helped Georgia to come to today is its very firm and solid understanding of where it belongs. And it belongs to Caucasus, of course, to South Caucasus, but it identifies itself with the values that you often refer to as European values, I often refer to as our common values. There is no so much discourse in Georgia on our identity or differences in where people think the country should go, what orientation country should take. That discourse is not present in Georgia. Also in the political spectrum, which is quite diverse and let's say it polarized, even there, the mainstream parties that have large constituency support, those are the parties that have very clear pro-Western orientation. But that is not a political choice. That is so because it comes from the people, that majority of Georgia's people identify themselves, as I said, with those values, and therefore the parties and the political leaders that also very clearly, say it up front that the idea and the policy and ideology is to bring the country closer to EU and to achieve full EU integration, are the ones that get popular support. So that is shown and demonstrated by many surveys, and that is very often also and very easily measured if you look at the results of the elections, because the parties that ensure or get significant, like over 85% support, are the parties that have very clear pro-Western orientation. This is already, I mean, that is one thing, so that it comes from the people and it is part of our national identity as we believe it. And that is the only, I mean, that is an existential fact. We don't even say a choice, because choice means that you can go either this way or that way. We don't believe this is a choice. This is the fact, and this is how it can be, the only way it can be. We have put it in our constitution already since last year that, or since this year when we have adopted it finally, that that constitutional bodies are mandated and required to do everything in their legal capacity to support Georgia's European and Georgia's NATO integration ambition. So that is, I mean, also reinforced by this legal framework now in Georgia. As to the challenge and what people require us to do that Michael was asking, people in Georgia are very challenging, very demanding. We as Georgians are very emotional and impatient, and we don't stand in one place. There are very many things happening at the same time. And there are a lot of demands from constituency towards the political group that, of course, has certain responsibility as being in power. The demand is to bring Georgia closer to EU. That is our top national priority because, as I said, it is not an end in itself. It is seen as a means to ensure what we want to have in this country, and that is a peaceful ability and stable environment for our development. And that is only achieved if we stand together with the EU, and that's why it has such a strong support from Georgia's society. Now, if you break this down and ask the people why is it that they support EU, they might not be able to explain it in detail, but there is a very high emotional support. Now, it's up to us to also translate that into more informed, understanding and more informed way of looking at what EU integration, what EU in general is, and why is it that we are striving to become members of the EU. We also very often say, and I will repeat it again, that for us, this path that we now undergo, and we understand it very well that this is a long and challenging path, this is something which also something that gives us a lot of advantages, because on the way we transform this country into a more modern, more European, more democratic, more solid, economically sound, socially oriented state. And that's what we want to have in the end.
Thank you. I mean, just to before giving the floor on the issue of values and common values, as you say, I mean, looking at this country and the enormous support that there is for the European Union path of this country, it's obviously a very stable base. At the same time, I see as a real challenge of communicating and having a discussion about some of these common values, because as we know, I think there is a common basis for us all. On other issues, we are struggling with the narrative and explaining what the European Union stands for when it comes to issues like minorities, as we know, and other such issues, which is also part of the disinformation that is floating around. So taking that discussion seriously and bringing it out for a discussion at the pace for which the country and the population is ready for, I think will be the key. And it's going to be a tricky maneuvering, but something that we will need to do together. Please.
Thank you. And thank you for the question about the values. Case of Moldova. Well, as I mentioned, geographically, Moldova is somehow sandwiched by two countries. On one hand is Romania, EU country and NATO member. On the other hand, on the other part, we have Ukraine, pro-European oriented country. For us, there is no alternative, not because we are sandwiched, but because Moldova is geographically European country. Moldova culturally is European from the civilization point of view, historically, and during the time of independent Moldova, practically all governments and political elites were pro-European. In 2014, Moldova was the pioneer between the Eastern Partnership, being the first country that obtained the free visa traveling and the association agreement, free trade agreement, and till now we are obtaining benefits from these agreements. Well, I have to say that unfortunately in Moldova we still have some nostalgic from the past times, parts of population. That means that we have some important political parties like Communist Party, which is now decreasing, but another one is the Socialist Party that generated a president, a pro-Russian, pro-Kremlin president in Moldova. Probably our case, Moldova, we have to look more into strategic communication between the political elites and the population to communicate, to explain, to show what are the opportunities in case of pro-European orientation and integration, and what is offering the so-called customs union or Eastern integration with promoted by Russian Federation. There is no comparison. For Europe, main thing is democracy, freedom, human rights, rule of law. For Russian Federation or CIS countries, we can look into the way of development of these countries, but will not find where is this real behavior in order to ensure the rule of law, fighting with corruption, respecting human rights, and so on. That's another element to fight disinformation, also to develop strategic communication. Thank you.
Just very briefly, since 2013, when the level of support of NATO membership in Ukraine was just 16%, now it's around 50%. So the citizens, and in case of referendum tomorrow, among the people who will participate in the referendum, almost 67% will support NATO membership perspective. And now Ukraine joining the Lithuanian example, Georgian, we are also trying to amend our constitution and to write that NATO and the EU aspirations is a part of our foreign affairs policy, strategic goal, and the implementation from parliament, from government, and president, we are obliged to implement the policy towards NATO and the EU. In Ukraine, NATO is associated with the Security Guarantees Alliance because of Russian aggression, and so we've seen dramatical change in supporting NATO Euro-Atlantic aspirations in Ukraine. And also within the EU support after visa liberalization, more than 10 millions of Ukrainians received biometric passports and traveled to EU using the freedom of movement, a fundamental right. And it's also changing the perception towards the EU, and a lot of people with the nostalgia, elderly people, when they are traveling with their children to EU, they are changing their perception. And also, now we are talking about how Ukraine, Georgia could become a member of EU. But I think also it's important to talk what Ukraine and Georgia could bring to NATO. What is the role of Ukraine in the global security sphere? So this is really important to keep in mind that actually, if you analyze the 10 countries which became the members of NATO since 2004, let's just like Lithuania, Estonia, then in 2009, Croatia, Albania, and in 2017, Montenegro. So all these countries, 10 countries, like a member of NATO from members of NATO from 2004. And let's analyze Ukraine potential. So we have practical, unique experience in containing and deterring Russian army at Ukrainian territory. So Ukraine de facto became the eastern flank of NATO. Let's be honest. We are, of course, we forced to spend more than 5% of our GDP on security and defense. We would prefer to invest this money on social affairs, on infrastructure, but this is a part of our security responsibility to defend our territory, but it's more than 5% of GDP which goes on security and defense. Thanks to the EU and thanks to the United States and others who helped Ukrainian army, Ukraine armed forces to become a really very professional, and with the numbers like 270,000 of soldiers. So this is also our contribution. So I would like to ask you to consider Ukraine not as a victim of Russian aggression, as a contributing partner who has unique practical experience in countering Russian hybrid warfare, defending Ukrainian critical infrastructure from cyber security attacks. Last year we faced a lot of cyber security attacks on banking sector, energy, critical infrastructure. So this is how we could donate to NATO community. So, and I'm sure that this is in the benefit of both Ukraine and NATO alliance. So how we could strengthen NATO and also make global security more secure or safe with our presence.
Thank you. I have to tell you that we are running out of time. We have one more question from the audience, and but you're most welcome if you like, and perhaps we could have a quick answer to end up.
Well, I have a question to Mr. Galler specifically. You mentioned that there is a certain difficulty in perceiving the Black Sea region as European. And speaking from your own constituency, either local or party or the coalition you are in, what's the underlying cause for that perception or for the difficulty of perception? Is it strategic? Is it domestic political? Is it cultural? Or it's just a matter of discourse that's changeable? And how structural is it? How can we influence it, and how plausible it is to evolve over time? Also, do you think it's moving forward, backward, in better direction, in worse direction in the last few years? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. I think there are, as always, different aspects. One aspect is, of course, that we have perceived in the general public. Yes, we have had the EU enlargement, and now somehow the EU has many of its own problems. So why should we not address our own internal problems first before we continue looking beyond where we are? So there is this tendency. I wouldn't, this word enlargement fatigue is, I don't like it actually. I think it's more about our own current discussions that we have, and issues like, for instance, the refugee crisis distracts from other challenges, unfortunately. I mean, we have managed amongst the informed political circles, there is awareness, both of the Russian threat or challenge, or however you put it, and accordingly we take the necessary political decisions with prolonging sanctions and so on. There is, of course, in the general uninformed public, when it is about issues that geographically go further away from the center of Europe, there is also a tendency to say, why should we care about all that? And that is a task for us decision makers to lead in the discussion. It's about political leadership. If we let the debate drift or simply unorganized, then a decisive and committed Russian propaganda is able to influence much of our general public, be it through social media or buying companies or politicians who set the agenda. So it is our task to lead politically on the challenges that we are actually faced. I don't think it is, and accordingly I think we can also show the advantages that we have experienced through enlargement of the EU. It is readable. Those who want to take note of the facts and figures can see that enlargement, the entire process, has been a win-win situation for the old members, for the new members, for the richer members, for the poorer members. And this, so to say, this positive results that everybody who wants to can read, we have a task, I would say, to enlarge the scope. We have always argued enlargement is also a peace project, a stability project. Now we are, of course, currently focusing also on the Western Balkans. There are still 6 states to come. And unfortunately, there are some where I would say are in more difficult situations than some other countries who have their aspirations as well. I don't see a solution for the internal Bosnia situation yet, because there is a lack of political will. But that should not hinder us from looking towards aspirations further east. As I said before, we cannot politically offer this concrete membership perspective with a timetable yet. The only thing that we have got is the Article 49, where you should always refer to, where we in the Parliament are referring to more than in the Council, perhaps. But I would not say that the reasons for hesitation in the general public could not be overcome. I'm convinced when there is political leadership, and when you get our people, our decision makers, our journalists, our entrepreneurs to your countries in an excellent framework, as I said, you will become irresistibly attractive for us, because there is a lot of the potential. And perhaps to end with, I recall when I was in Kiev 3 weeks ago for this YES conference, there was a reminder of one of the conferences that took place in Yalta, when it was still in Yalta. And there was a forum where there was a Russian representative and there was an EU representative. The EU representative was Karl. And then the Ukrainian presenter asked the questions to the Russian and to the European, what do you offer us? And the Russian representative, that was well before all this aggression now, the Russian representative told the Ukrainians, we offer you love. And Karl Bildt, in his northern Protestant mood, said, well, we offer you law. Well, at first glance, that is not very emotional to offer law. There are people who said when I studied law, make love, not law. But the point is, of course, what we have to achieve at is not only to, in a politically technocratical way, to offer you law formulations and so on, but to add to this law also some emotion. It need not be a love that is not warranted, but I think we can actually get our public to be interested in your region here and to see it is a mutual interest that you develop and that you get stable and that we at some point can embrace you fully where we are not yet. But that is your task primarily as well. If you become so irresistible, as I said before, at some point also the general public will see it is in our interest to have you all.
Thank you, Michael. On this happy note, unless any of the panelists would like to add anything, let me just very briefly sum up this panel. I mean, my impression from the discussion we have had is that in terms of setting the diagnosis with regard to the challenges, I think we are on the same page, and I sensed a commonality of the different aspects, the broad spectrum of the security challenges that each of you are facing, and I also see comfort in the fact, coming from Brussels myself just recently, that this narrative is also very well anchored in Brussels. I would like to stress the point that Hanya made in one of her comments about resilience and stability and how it starts at home. You were mentioning about disinformation, what is the best way of tackling that, and that's basically by demonstrating a society that is able to withstand such things, and that brings us to the issue about how do you secure freedom of media so that citizens feel that they can trust their own media, which is a key to making yourself less vulnerable to these things. Economic threats and so on becomes much less powerful if there is an economy that is vibrant and working, including with European and other investing, which again comes back to the issues about creating a level playing field, the rule of law, building institutions that are credible also for foreign investors. And the same thing would go for the risk of ethnic manipulation and such attempt, which boils down to the fact of what laws and regulations are governing these issues in the countries. I mean, just to stress that thing, because obviously it's something that we are working very hard on a day-to-day basis with all of your countries. I think with the question about whether Europe or some member states in Europe is keen to get back to a business as usual with Russia, I think it's an exaggeration, because I think quite a lot has changed. So I wouldn't term it in the same way as Michael doesn't like the word enlargement fatigue. I think this business as usual is not really there. I think there is an interest, of course, to get back to a modus vivendi with Russia, including on this region, which is a common interest. But the way Europe today is discussing Russia has a new dimension to it, because of many of the issues that you are facing, including disinformation, cyber, hybrid, and so on, are elements in our societies today, which was not the case a few years back. Finally, to say, when it comes to the region, I mean, I asked myself before this panel about the Black Sea as a region, as a concept, and so on. I think on that one, there were questions asked also among the panelists. To me, it doesn't really matter whether in this context the narrative is about the Black Sea or whether it's about three countries that all have association agreements and DCFTAs with the European Union. It makes sense to work cooperatively. The European Union and NATO and others all love regional cooperation, so setting that up and working as a team makes sense, however it's done. And one thing that I sense as an opportunity today, and which was one of the weaknesses when I was doing this business back in 2006, was the issue of local ownership. In other words, starting from you and your aspirations in getting this going and pushing it. I saw that 12 years ago as lacking when we were discussing the Black Sea region as a concept. It was our concept, but it did not really resonate with the countries in the region itself. So also that is very helpful. And with that, I would like to thank all of you for being here, and I would especially like to thank all our panelists, and I would propose that we give them a warm round of applause before we move to coffee. Thank you.